Hello, my name is Elisa Howansky, and for exam two, I'm going to be covering a couple of conservation issues that we have covered in class. To begin with, we're going to be talking about seed dispersers and their importance for uh, facilitating biodiversity and aiding in maintaining it. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the research done by Dr. Evan Ream. His study location was in Guam, specifically because of the introduction of the brown tree snake in World War II. In World War II, Guam was turned into a military base, and with military ships coming and going, brown tree snakes ended up being introduced there and have become invasive. And since then, they have decimated the bird populations, specifically the seed disperser bird populations, and they are boreal ones because they are excellent climbers. Without the seed dispersers, you end up having reduced diversity, more invasive and wind dispersed plants, and more habitat fragmentation, and therefore less habitat fragmentation repair. And that's why for his study sites, he chose Saipan to compare with Guam. Guam being the habitat fragmented, no seed dispersers um, site, and Saipan being this control of there are no brown tree snakes, and therefore the environment is flourishing. So his research focused on how can we return Guam to the state that Saipan is at. And he proposed introducing species that are seed dispersers, but specifically choosing one or a few that are the best at it so that they can start strong. But first, obviously, they have to get rid of the brown tree snakes, which there are a variety of methods that are being used, like poisoned parachutes, parachutes coming down with poisoned mice, and those mice being eaten, traps, etc. So deal with the brown tree snakes, then reintroduce a seed disperser to help repair the habitat. And for this, they had five candidates. And of these candidates, they immediately knocked out these two, the bridled white-eye and the white-throated ground dove. And that was because they found in their preliminary research that the bridled white-eye, with having such a small mouth, ended up eating around the seeds instead of actually ingesting the seeds themselves. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, the white-throated ground dove ended up actually consuming the seeds and actually destroying the seeds in the process. Um, so that left them with the Micronesian starling, the Mariana flute dove, and the golden white-eye. And what they ended up choosing as the best seed disperser of the three was the Micronesian starling. And this was because in their studies, it dispersed the most wide range of plant species. It moved seeds furthest away from the mother plant, and it also moved seeds to degraded habitat areas. And the interesting thing about the Micronesian starling is there's actually small populations of Micronesian starlings still in Guam, and that's because of their ability to um, take advantage of human infrastructure. So the military base that's on there, they build a lot of their nesting in there. But then during the day, they go out and they forage. So what they have decided to do is hopefully make uh, housing for the Micronesian starlings to aid them in introducing back further into the island, obviously removing the snakes first, but just in case, they've also decided to try and make snake-proof nesting boxes for these Micronesian starlings in the hope of reintroducing them and eventually getting Guam back to the state that Saipan is at. For our next topic, we're going to be talking about uh, insect-dependent species declining. So bird species are declining at a rapid rate. And Dr. Doug Ptolemy decided that he wanted to see which ones specifically are being affected by this the most. And what he found in some of his research, using data from another study, was that uh, bird species where insects were essential to their development or at some point in their lifespan are declining at a much higher rate than bird species that are not, where insects are not essential. And in a diet analysis of a bunch of birds, he ended up finding that for nestlings during the breeding season, caterpillars, the larval stages of like butterflies and moths, are what uh, these birds are feeding their nestlings the most. And he hypothesized that this is because of their wide availability during the breeding season, because of the explosion of summer plants, because they're large, soft, and nutritious. And that's because with them eating these plants, they uh, have a ton of essential carotenoids inside of them. And they're also not chitinous, which is part of the softness of them. So whenever they go to feed their young, they don't end up getting hurt by something hard going down their mouth. But the unfortunate thing that he was finding was that these species, like butterflies, moths, are also declining. So that might be contributing to these insect essential species declining. So how do we fix this? What he ended up coining was this homegrown national park initiative, which he focuses on private land because like over 80% of um, land in North America is privately owned. And also because a bunch of pesticides and herbicides that are being put on these lawns to make them perfectly manicured ends up being terrible for insects. So they end up losing a lot of habitat that they could otherwise be using to breed. And then eventually birds will feed their young, these caterpillars, their larval stages. And what does this entail? So for him, what he's doing is writing a bunch of informational literature and encouraging citizen science. So he has on the right, you can see an excerpt from his website where he is actually um, advertising guides on how to restore biodiversity to your yard. So this would include um, dedicating less of your property to lawn space and more of it to a more biodiverse atmosphere, incorporating less ornamental plants and more native contributor species rather than species that are not going to contribute to the native environment, ones that these insect species cannot feed on. So the next topic that we're going to be talking about is plastic pollution. And this one is a lot more bleak than the other two because the other two have these possible, very attainable solutions. But plastic pollution is one of those ones that it's not a clear cut answer. And a lot of things are being held up because of money. So, according to the IUCN, that's where I got this statistic. Um, as of 2024, approximately 460 million metric tons of plastic waste are produced by the world each year, and 14 million metric tons of that ends up in the oceans. And this is bad because plastic pollution is a major driver of biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, and it continues to contribute to climate change, as well as whenever it's in the environment with rough weather and things ingesting them, or even just the waves on the beach. causing abrasions to this plastic, you end up getting microplastics in the atmosphere, which ends up being much almost worse than the actual plastic. So where does this plastic come from? So they researchers have hypothesized and tried to determine the place that this plastic is coming from, and a lot of it comes from like continental um, cities or even countries of um, less economic growth, or even more, basically anywhere. But it's disproportionately affecting remote oceanic islands. Even though they're not producing the most plastic waste, they are on the receiving end of the most plastic waste. And this is possibly due to poor waste disposal practices, including and also industrial fishing and rivers in polluting countries. So for birds, how is this affecting birds specifically? In this statistic from Dr. Kimbria's research in 2024, um, they found that in this top 10 here, just the top 10 we're going to focus on, every single one of these groups are shorebirds. And down here on the x-axis is the percentage of affected by plastic waste. And you can see top 10, they're all shorebirds. And if you can see here in the same paper, fish eating birds, mollusk eating birds, crab eating birds, and scavengers are disproportionately affected by plastic waste. So the birds that it's affecting are specifically ocean birds and birds that are near or reliant on water supplies. So how is plastic entering these birds? Specifically, it's doing it through ambient microplastics in the water or in the atmosphere, but also they can often accidentally ingest it or even purposely if they mistake it for food. What it does to these birds is externally, it could cause injuries if they get stuck in it. It can cause obstructions in their esophagus for whenever they eat, they could choke. It can also cause stomach ulcers and therefore damage to their digestive tract with sharp pieces or even just the chemicals ending up upsetting their stomach. It can also make them feel more full than they actually are, so they're not getting the nutrients they need. So therefore, it would reduce food consumption in these birds. And this is a statistic that was published by the UN from Twitter, actually, in 2024, that plus or minus 44% of seabird species are being affected by ingesting fragments of plastic pollution. Um, so terrible, terrible, terrible. So covering plastic pollution first, since that was the one that we just ended with, these declines in shorebirds is only going to get worse if this problem isn't addressed. But a lot of the policies in the video that we watched, we talked about, or they talked about how the UN was working on these policies to get a bunch of countries involved in plastic regulation. But I actually went and looked it up, and these policies are still in limbo. And that video said that hopefully we would have these answers by 2024, but they're still in limbo. So it's probably going to be a long while, if ever, that we get any sort of answer to what we're going to do about this plastic pollution. But a lot of the stuff is going to be like citizen science or volunteer based. Um, but to summarize the other two conservation issues that we talked about, for avian seed dispersers, they are essential to maintaining and restoring biodiversity. And we talked about Dr. Ream's research in Guam for that. And for insect-dependent bird species, they are declining because of their partially because of their dependence on caterpillars and the larval stages of moths and butterflies to feed their young. But focusing on private landowners and introducing biodiversity into our lawns may be the key to fixing this issue. And plastic pollution is a very bleak topic, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get better. It's only going to get worse. So here are my references, and here is to hoping that the world fixes itself and that we can do something to stop some of these problems. And I hope everyone has a good day.